All right, Kiss Army, welcome to the KissFAQ Podcast. Thank you for giving us your time today and letting us into your head. I hope we don't do any damage. This is a Kiss-related podcast by the board for the board. We hope that you enjoy. Welcome to episode 75 of the KissFAQ Podcast. I'm your host today, Julian Gill. Big thank you to Lonnie, St. Louis Kiss, for filling in and taking the reins last week. Very much appreciated, sir, and good to see you. Also joining me today are Ken, 69th Blizzard, and Marcus Almighty. Mark on the board. Welcome back, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Lou?
Good to be here.
Current affairs. Let's get these out of the way quickly. New Kiss Encyclopedia is out. Check it out on Amazon. You can now read some excerpts and get an idea about its contents. Prince, of course, was verified today as dying from opiate overdose, so I'm sure Gene Simmons will be smugly happy. And that's really it. Vegas, you guys discussed last week when I wasn't around. So
did you see it?
I have not seen. I did not go. It was middle of the week. I'm busy. I have a life. I can't just.
Pardon the hell out of me.
I couldn't find the time, but I do hear now, and I've been reading that it's going to be available on pay-per-view next.
Yeah.
And of course, people on the board are complaining how many times they're going to make me buy the same damn thing. Well,
it's Kiss.
You don't have to. Just like I didn't have to go to the show. I did not go to the show. I now have a second chance. I can actually pay for it on pay-per-view if I can't wait for the Blu-ray, DVD, the 18 different versions, which they're planning. That's called choice. And you are allowed to go. You are allowed not to go. That is freedom. It's absolutely a wonderful concept. So moving on from there, before I shovel myself into getting banned by Gene Simmons on his Twitter. Oh, snap, already did that. Let's get into today's topic. And, we're just talking about changes, I think. Let's look back at the first few Kiss albums, which are, of course, the cornerstones of the catalog, the original 6 or 7 albums or so, and think about what we might like to change with each one of those to make it better in our eyes, whether it's different artwork, which we've kind of covered before, but specifically for, just making changes, material subtracted, added, maybe different producers, different sonic styles. Let's go straight to the beginning, and let's go to Canada. Mark.
Yes. Okay, so I, over the week, made many notes for such a topic, and I guess I'll go through just a few of them that I think that are worth noting. So for the first record, obviously, since we're talking about the first album, the first thing I would probably change, and I think that we kind of talked about this before, was the cover. Now, the album cover, to me, I don't hate it, but if I was allowed to take over the reins, so to speak, I would have probably changed the image of the cover. I mean, we were discussing about how it was a little confusing to kind of get the vibe of the band based on the cover that they had there. So I was thinking of that one poster that came out from the very first era where they had all of them kind of standing together with like Gene hovering over top of them, and I think one of them had the knife. I think it was Peter had the knife.
Yeah. The Red Room shots, I think they were called. The Rayanne Rubenstein.
I think that would
Ross would know exactly what it's called, exactly.
Yeah, I would have used that probably as the cover image. It would have been more. I think people would have been able to kind of figure out a little bit easier what they were trying to strive for using that image, I think, for a cover like that. Then in terms of a record producer, I thought about this long and hard because I thought about it from my perspective of when I first started in a band and I first got my first record deal. And we were pretty much happy to be plugged up with pretty much any producer at that point because when you first start, you want to be involved in the game. You want to get in the game. Now, being offered a decent record producer, that's what you want, right? I mean, sure, you could sit down and go through 100 different ones and sit there and argue about it. Why shouldn't we take this guy and this guy? But I think at that point you have adrenaline, you're excited, you want to get out there, you want to start rolling. And I think that you kind of trust in your overlords at that point, which would be Neil Bogart, to say, okay, these are the guys that you want to use. And I think that they were smart to use what they were given at that point because they were new, they didn't have much experience in this. So I think Kenny Kerner and Richie Weiss were decent. I didn't mind the first record sonically, to be quite honest with you. So I think that I would have probably kept the same. And the one last point that I made for this record was I would have definitely changed by taking out the love theme from Kiss. I would have took out of the record, and I would have put on Watching You. They already had it already in their lineup there of songs. Even on the original demo, they had it already. So why not put that song on there instead? I think it would have been much stronger. Would have made the album much stronger, and then it would have also forced them to think up some more material for their next record. But I'll get to that later when it's my turn again. So, but those are my 3 points I thought up for the record.
I still love that one, and I know we talked about it on the other show, the Rayon Rubenstein, the Red Room type photos, which was obviously the poster that was included in some of the promotional copies of the first album. I mean, I love that concept. I get what they were trying to do with the album cover, but I'm totally agreeing with you on that point. Kenny Kerner and Richie Wise, for me, I think do a perfectly fine job as producers on this album. That's like the one area I wouldn't really go into changing. I thought I'd look up, who was producing other albums around the time, who was the hot producers, and it's kind of like Jack Douglas's. I was like, okay, who produced Deep Purple back then? Well, Deep Purple, well, I guess they're not going to produce Kiss. So, those sort of sounding albums for me, I wanted to kind of go back into the period and see if there was anyone else who had like a sound going that was so different from what Kerner and Wise actually came up with. And I just don't think that there was any option for, they didn't do a bad job on that first album. It doesn't quite have the edge, but I think it's, really a good presentation of the material. The stuff I would love to change with the first album, it revolves around Love Theme and Kissing Time. Obviously, Kissing Time's not on the original release, so I would say keep it off the original release. Keep it off all future releases. It just doesn't do anything for the album. Though I get why they did add it. It's more the songs that were missed in the catalog. Love Theme should be the full thing with should be Acrobat basically. With the heavy intro, the instrumental intro and the heavy, much too young part that follows. And I think Let Me Go Rock and Roll, or whatever it was called at that time, should have been on the album as well. Maybe even Watching
Baby
You.
Let Me Go, whatever.
Yeah, thank you. Baby Let Me Go. And, Watching You. They really should have used all of that strong material because it's such a short album, regardless, even, once you take out Kissing Time, it's freaking short. So I know that was kind of standard for albums at the time, but I would have just gotten all that stuff out right at the beginning and made them write more stuff as they went down the road. So that's my take on the first album. Ultimately, I don't think you can really change too much on it. It's just kind of perfection for Kiss as a debut. Lonnie, what's your take?
There's not a whole lot I'd change on the first album because it is, it's the starting ground for what became Kiss. And I don't have a problem with the producers on it. I think the album sonically sounds good too. So there's not a whole lot I would change. I would definitely change, and we've mentioned this before, I would definitely change the back album cover because it's basically unreadable. You can't read or see anything on there. It's just totally ridiculous. And I don't
uninspired.
I don't know who who one thought up that idea, or who two said, yeah, that is a good idea. Let's use it. Let's go with it. So that'd be the first and foremost thing that would change. And I'm not going to disagree with you about Kissin' Time. I think it totally takes away from what they were trying to say on that album. And then you have Kissin' Time on there. It's like it doesn't fit at all on there. So I would have left that. I would have obviously left that off. And I said last week that you could have left Love Theme from Kiss off and put on Watching You, like Mark said earlier. So I mean, that song was obviously out there, and songs like Lover All I Can were out there too at the time. I mean, they were Wicked Lester songs. So I don't understand the need to go with an instrumental. Who told them that was a good idea either? So that'd be my take. Is really the back album. I don't have a problem with the album cover itself. I think because I've seen it so many times and it's so iconic in my mind that I have grown to love it. So for me, it'd be the back album cover, Love Theme from Kiss, Kissin' Time, and put on maybe Watching You, or what was the other one I said? Love Her All I Can.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just crunched the numbers on that. I took off Love Theme, I took off Kissin' Time, put on Watching You and Let Me Go Rock and Roll. And the time, it's 35 minutes. So, that certainly would have been feasible with how the album is formatted. I know that you like to keep it to less than 20 minutes per side of final for a better quality pressing. So, Ken, first album, do we commit sacrilege and change anything in your mind?
Yeah, well, I did a couple episodes ago. I said I changed the cover. Because my first impression of the cover was, what the heck? It's clowns, right? That's what I said. And I recommended at that time, or my thoughts on it were, they should have had a full group, maybe not the red, that's a good, that photo session's good. But I would have rather had them with their instruments on stage, similar to a live, which I said before. So that's what I would have gone with. And the back cover, they could have done something better with that. Like I said, I think on the other episode, they could have put the four faces on the back cover instead of the front. So that's where I go there. As for a producer, I would have stuck with Eddie Kramer. His demos is what sold, Bogart and who was the other person that told Bogart about it? I can't remember now, but who listened to it first before Bogart. I'm not talking about Coyne.
Kenny Kerner.
Wasn't it Kenny Kerner heard it?
Yeah, Kerner
it was Kerner.
It.
So, even though Kerner liked it, and he became one of the two producers, I still would have went with Eddie Kramer. Just me. And then as for Kissin' Time being on there or them adding it, I would have replaced it, like Mark said, with something else. And Lonnie also said too, maybe Watching You, something like that. As for the instrumental song, they should have had the full acrobat thing on there. I would have rather had that in context, not just stripping that out of it, and it doesn't make any sense to have that on there like that. And then the last thing would be to, instead of the droning outro of Black Diamond, I would have had either a hard stop or stop, like what they would do, how they would treat the song in concert. They kind of do, the over and over riff at the end there, but just end it like they did in concert. I mean, that would have been better. Or they not slow it down and then fade it out, let it fade out, something like that. But I never got that slowing down of it. It just kind of didn't work for me too much.
I remember hearing something that Gene actually thought it was some fantastic, impressive recording technique that he thought was great to do. So, and I remember him also saying that he mentioned it to the Van Halen guys when they were doing the demo, that that he thought of that whole ending sequence that was slowing down the tape. So you got to blame Gene for that. So
so that's my thoughts. I mean, it's a great album, but just some minor things here and there.
Yep, it's really hard to go back and touch something that's like kind of legendary, but and now I've dug myself a hole when we get to Hotter Than Hell. I'm like, well, I've already taken Let Me Go Rock and Roll and Watching You off and put it on the first album. Well, what the hell do I fill in on there? I think a lot of people are gonna immediately, when we talk about changing Hotter Than Hell, jump into the sound of that album and how it's like having a couple of cardboard boxes on your ears, and it's so distant and muffled. But we've lived with it so long, it's really got a character of its own. I think if we were suddenly to find that they had,
Mark's not going to buy that.
Mark's not going to buy it, but let me keep trying, Mark. If someone was to play you that album it would be a very strange experience if it sounded like the first album rather than what it does. I mean, obviously, we're so used to it now. We'd be like, oh my God, we're actually, it doesn't sound like a 4-track recording or a 2-track recording, because it really so bled together sonically. That's going to be the first thing I would change. Change how it was recorded. Keep them in New York in the same studios. We know why they did it on the West Coast, so they obviously didn't have too much choice. But I would have replicated things as much as I could if I was using the same producers as the first album, just to keep the consistency there. If you're going to that sort of level to try and keep them, working with the same producers, I would have also told Ace, no, you're not allowed to build your own fucking amp for the album. Forget it. Use the ones that are made by professionals. Put your soldering iron away and take those cardboard boxes and put them back out in the recycle.
What do you mean?
They didn't recycle it.
Yeah, which 1974, no such thing. For mine, I mean, obviously I took those 2 tracks off. What would I put back on? I would throw Kissin' Time on there on the second album because it would make more sense after the fact. It's been a radio single halfway through the cycle, just to use it as a filler track if they're short of material. But they're not. They've got plenty of songs that they could be doing, and just pick one of the other ones to fill it out. Everything else on there, I wouldn't take any of those songs. I'd put Peter Criss's drum solo back in because that is an abomination that they took it out. How dare they mess with the cat, man. Gosh. Put that solo back in. No, I'm joking, but... Nah, I wouldn't change a thing with the rest of the songs other than the sound. I wouldn't change the art in any way because it's just so visually startling and different and eye-catching. It really pops. So that's me, Lonnie. Before you get into another conversation.
Sorry. I think they're leaving now. I think I'm the last one here. The first thing I would do would be to change the album cover itself from that black and white shot to a color shot of the band. I never understood why that picture was in black and white. It
was in black and white because it was decades ago.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Color pictures didn't exist in '74. I'm corrected by the boss. No, I would have put that shot in color, make it stand out more, make it pop more on the album cover itself. Because it's a very visual band. Why put the band itself in black and white with all these colors around them? It doesn't make any sense to me. So that'd be the first thing I'd do. And then obviously, but I'm not going to agree with Julian about the sound. That I would love to hear a remixed or remastered version of Hotter Than Hell that doesn't sound like I have cardboard boxes over my ears. I think it'd be this because the song for song, it's one of, if not, I mean, it's one of their strongest albums with song wise. I mean, Got to Choose, Let Me Go Rock and Roll, Parasite, Watching You. I mean, those are all staples to this day in their catalog. So it's really a shame to me that that's the sound that we got off that album, because I remember being, in high school and somebody says, well, if I wanted to get into Kiss, what album would you recommend me listening to? And I was really into Hotter Than Hell at the time, but I couldn't recommend them going and listening to Hotter Than Hell because I really loved the songs on there, but I couldn't say, oh yeah, go listen to this album standalone by itself, because it doesn't stand up sonically to, especially with what they did with Dress to Kill, because Dress to Kill just sounds immensely better, in my opinion, than Hotter Than Hell. So, but the one thing, if I had to change one thing about Hotter Than Hell, it'd obviously be the artwork on the front. I would have put that image in color, and I would change, and I would have cleaned up the sound, and I wouldn't have let Ace use a homemade guitar amplifier with Julian on that as well.
Does anyone think that they should have kept the original title, The Harder They Come, instead of Hotter Than Hell? Or
I like Hotter Than Hell because it sounds more edgy.
And do you think you could really listen to Strange Ways and not have it sounding so heavy, so dirty, so sludgy? Can you imagine hearing that clean? or even the guitar chords at the beginning of Coming Home. You know, Mark, let's go to you as the musician, you know, here, the real musician here.
Well, I have a few differing opinions, though, to be honest. I think, obviously, the first thing that I would have done for this record is I would have changed producers right away. And in my preparing for this, I found myself having a common thread in that I found that I would have changed producers every single album with these guys for the first 6 records, because I found that almost when they had another guy come in, that it just seemed like they might have connected better with them. It was somebody different. They weren't so used to the person. And when you get used to somebody, you get lackadaisical. You don't give it your all. I mean, I'm giving this from my own experience too. When you become comfortable with people, sometimes you're not willing to give your 100%. You're trying to impress people when you first meet them. And when you get a new producer in there, you want to show them how good you are and how good you do things. And if you're working on a guy for like 4 or 5 records in a row, by the time you're doing the 3rd record, you're so used to this guy. You're having him come over for dinner and stuff. He's not even like a producer. He's just like a friend now at this point, right? So I'd say to get a different producer in there. And there's quite a few different producers I was thinking about at this time. There was like Jack Douglas was around at this time. Even Eddie Oford, who did some of the Yes records, was around. You know, but the one guy who I was thinking about, who I would have loved to push to do this record, was Glenn Johns, who did the Who records. I thought that he would have given them just enough of the ballsier edge to their music without making it sound too different. You know, I mean, the Who and Kiss, yeah, they're not the same thing, but they were sort of, in my opinion, mining similar kind of, you know, material, in my opinion, in the sense of the whole rock and roll attitude, right? So I think that Glenn Johns would have been a great guy to come in and do that. Every record I've ever heard him do, I've liked. He's done a great job with those Who records. Some of my favorite Who records he's obviously did, right? And another thing that Julian brought up that I think is very important is that I would have really pushed for them to stay in New York City. I think that they were out of their element in LA. They didn't feel comfortable there. And I think staying in New York City would have made them feel comfortable, would have maybe made them in a better mood and attitude, especially when you're working on songs and possibly even writing songs. I mean, you want to be in a good frame of mind doing that. And, you know, being in LA where, you know, Paul gets his guitar stolen, you know, and stuff like that, it's not a good mind frame to be in when you're trying to accomplish your follow-up record, right? And, I mean, a lot of this is mental, you got to remember, right? Because, I mean, that kind of stuff really hampers someone's creativity. And the whole thing with Kerner and Weiss that really bugged me is this whole thing with the changing of the monitors in the studio, how they kept having stuff changed out, gear being changed out while they were recording. If these guys are professional, you know, engineers and producers, they should have put their foot down and said, listen, you're not changing anything in here anymore. Leave these in here, because speakers are like your lifeblood to the production of this stuff. I mean, you get used to the sound of the music coming out of the speakers, and when you keep changing them, believe it or not, changing speakers can change the sound that you hear when you're recording. And I mean, now all of a sudden, something that sounded like it had a good mid-range into it, you put a different kind of speakers in there that are sonically different, all of a sudden the mid-range is changing. You thought, well, what the hell happened here now? Now I got to go and change everything. And meanwhile, you didn't have to, because it's just a matter you change the speakers and the illusion of it changing just occurred. It didn't really occur. You know what I mean? So you got to be very careful with that kind of stuff. You got to be careful with gear. Keep it the way it is, and do your record top to bottom with the same gear. That's a thing that I read on every single forum I've ever been on. Never change your gear midstream, because you're going to pay for it in the end.
Unless someone steals your guitar.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You know, and that was a whole bunch of really good points from the musical perspective. I also wonder how much of this affected Kerner and Weiss moving from East Coast. I haven't done the research in advance to look up where they had actually worked. Had they worked at Village Recorder, you know, a lot before, you know, doing that second album with Kiss, because I had always been under the impression, you know, that they were generally, you know, tied with Neil and Buddha. And, you know, that's something I want to now go and look up and see if they'd worked out of there before. Because if you're not going to change your, you know, your speakers, the tools of your trade, is the, you know, the producer or the engineer's familiarity with the equipment that they're running tape through to capture stuff, I mean, that's equally important for what you're capturing. So are they fully versed on, I can't even remember what console they had in that studio off the top of my head. Ken, let's go to you on there.
Yes, so I agree with Lonnie about the picture. That was one of the things that I had written down, that I would have rather had a color photo. I think someone had mocked up online. We've seen them before where they put it as a color, and it looked better to me. Yeah, it looked better. As for the songs on the album, I wouldn't change any songs. They're all perfect for that album. No problems. They're great songs, classics. Now, as for a producer, I understand Mark's points on sometimes you get too comfortable with somebody, but in some cases maybe that's a good thing, in some cases not. If you look at bands like Rush or Van Halen, who had a producer that was stuck with them for a long time, they did pretty darn good. So, I guess if you...
It's exception to the rule, I think.
There's exceptions, sure. But if you get a good producer and start off with one and it turns out to be pretty good, then might as well stick with them. So I'm going to say Eddie Kramer again for the second album. I would have rather had than the Sludge Brothers, who produced Hotter Than Hell. So that's just a new nickname I just came up with. So yeah, and that's it. The producer
Neve.
And the cover. That's it. Songs are great.
And there's actually a good point. Yeah, certain bands. Alice Cooper Band is a great example of a band that grew, or Alice Cooper with Bob Ezrin, that they progressed from one album to the next and grew incrementally, both in terms of the songwriting, in terms of the performance, in terms of everything.
Like from Schools Out to $1 Billion Babies. God.
Yeah, I mean, just think of the development and maturity that was coming along there as Bob learned his trade more, because he never stopped being a student of sound, even to this day, and to the songwriting and to the performance and all that. And then think of the bands, Ted Templeman's a great example with Van Halen. He worked with them all the way through the David Lee Roth era.
Yeah, but you know what? Sorry, I got to cut you off on one thing, though. The thing is, though, you got to remember one thing. Look at Paul and Gene and those guys, and then look at someone like Alice Cooper. I get the feeling that these people were very receptive to these people and their ideas. We look at Paul and these guys now; they're not receptive to anything. I mean, who knows how early that kind of mentality crept in what they're making of their records. I mean,
completely agree.
To have somebody in there for a long period, you got to be willing to grow with them and accept their ideas and go through it with them. If you're not willing to do that, then it doesn't matter. And I mean, and another point that I read about 100 times is that Ted Templeman has been known to work with difficult artists. If you look that up, you'll see that it's in there in his bio that he's been known to work with difficult artists, i.e. Van Halen. Right. Well, I mean, in general, look at Fair Warning. That album was apparently a nightmare to make, but he kept it together and made a record that people still love to this day out of that band. But they should have completely exploded at that point. Sorry, continue.
Love Fair Warning. That is one of my favorite Van Halen albums.
Yeah.
But also think then,
same here.
You've got the George Martins and Beatles. He worked with them all through their career. We'll leave out the Phil Spector one because that really doesn't count where it falls in that band. What could another producer have done with the Beatles? Think about that for a second, because, again, the same sort of symbiotic relationship that we kind of described with Ezrin and Alice Cooper. George Martin grew along with the Beatles as they grew. But what could someone who came in and totally said, we're not using the same formula here, we're using a different formula. So, I mean, it's a fascinating thing to consider, especially, we're talking about other acts. Moving up, I guess we move on to Dress to Kill.
Yep.
And Lonnie, let's throw that one to you first.
Well, Dress to Kill, I would have made it longer somehow because it's extremely short. I would have included more guitar on there. Like Rock and Roll Night doesn't even have a guitar solo on it, and
but Ace had a card game.
well, okay. Sorry. But I still would have. But didn't Wagner to come in and put a guitar solo on it a year later.
Ouch.
I mean, it's an icon, like it or not, it's an iconic song, and the studio version doesn't even have a guitar solo on there from this guitar-driven band, that everybody loves and looks to Ace Frehley as a guitar hero. Their most iconic song doesn't even have a guitar solo in the studio version. It's kind of very odd. But I would have added more guitar solos on there to try to lengthen the album a little bit, or maybe even dip into a little more Wicked Luster like they did, or try to put like a Keep Me Waiting on there somehow, and rock that up a little bit like they did Lover All I Can, to try to lengthen the album a little bit, because I really like Dress to Kill. I think it really kind of gets lost in the mix with the original 6 albums with Destroyer and Rock and Roll Over, and the original album getting a lot of the attention. But Come On and Love Me is probably my favorite Kiss song ever. So I love Dress to Kill. So, and yeah, they were running a little bit short on material, I guess, by this point, because they're dipping their toe back into some of these Wicked Luster songs that they had avoided on the first couple albums. But I would have added more Wicked Luster songs. Like I said, I would like to see a rocked up version of Keep Me Waiting on there. But other than that, I don't have a whole... It's hard to criticize these first 6 albums a whole lot, because if you're going to defend Kiss in any way, shape, or form, you throw out these first 6 albums. Well, these are so great. How can you not like Kiss?
I can find a way.
I can't. But as far as album cover goes, I wouldn't change it a bit. I think it's outstanding. Well, maybe here's one thing I'd do. Instead of on the back having the same thing on the back, I would have taken that picture of them going into the telephone booth in their outfits. Going into the telephone booth in the suits and then coming out in their outfits, like the whole Superman thing. I would have made that the back cover.
Yeah, I mentioned that last time too.
Oh, well, sorry.
No, I don't. Go ahead.
Hey, this is a
Kiss-related
podcast. We're repackaging earlier material.
To those early albums, I went out on a limb and said that.
No, that's what I would have done too.
I risked.
I would have changed that back cover of that Superman thing. That is really cool, and I do remember you saying that now, Mark. But that's such an iconic picture, though. That why didn't they use that for marketing purposes more than what they did? Because that's really a freaking cool idea that they didn't. I don't think they utilized as much as they should have.
So why didn't they use the color version as well then? Right?
Yeah.
For whomever it was who had suggested that the Hotter Than Hell cover picture should have been the color version.
Sure.
And I don't know. I don't think is there actually a color version of that Hotter Than Hell picture? Just taking a step back, or was that one that a fan had found colorized?
I think there is a color.
Hotter Than Hell picture.
I think it was colored pictures. It was taken as color picture, I thought, but
I think it's a fan creation, but that's one to be corrected on by folks out there.
I know the photo shoot looked like it was in color, but I don't know.
All right, so Lonnie,
that's it. Not a whole lot, because I like to see like I said, Keep Me Waiting, more guitars, and maybe that Superman telephone booth.
Yeah, Keep Me Waiting is a great idea. I would love to hear that.
Because look what they did with Lover All I Can from the Wicked Luster sessions to what you get on Dress to Kill. I would love to hear what they could have done with Keep Me Waiting in that same frame of mind. I think that would have been really cool.
Yeah. So I'm going to agree with you on that Keep Me Waiting would be a great candidate. It's a 30-minute album.
Right.
The guitar solo, obviously, in Rock and Roll All Night is kind of, I would have also said a real producer, because Neil Bogart I just never thought was a real producer, nor was Kiss at that stage of their career. That would have been the time if the record label just, happened to have something minor like money to pay someone, so they were very limited by what they were able to do. The band didn't have as much material as the story, but just think of what they demoed 2 other songs with Rock and Roll All Night, and what's the other one? I could look it up, and Anything for My Baby. They did Burning Up with Fever and Mistake at the same time. So
Mistake.
They did have other material, but I guess they wouldn't have been ready necessarily to put a song so different as Mistake on the album. Yeah. Burning Up with Fever should have been on a Kiss album well in advance of Gene.
Yeah, I agree.
being able to re-record that. For me, that's the only stuff I would add. I would add, those 2 songs, which date from the era, to everything else, and then you're probably up to a 35-minute album again. So, that's right in the same sort of length as the first album. I wouldn't change the cover, apart from maybe putting the 4th S on, figuring out a way to do the Kiss alignment along the outside without cutting off letters. I don't want to change it. It's just too. It's just too. I don't know.
Too iconic.
I don't want to overuse the word iconic, but it's just visually appealing. The back cover sucks balls. I mean, that just the reversed image I don't care for. But when you hold
they're out of money too.
Yeah, when you hold that package, they're so out of money they could afford to have the cover embossed. With
exactly
the raised lettering. So think about that.
That's the story you were getting though during that time frame though.
Yeah, and they were definitely in trouble. So I would add those 2 songs and that's it. Everything else, I don't even know about adding "Keep Me Waiting" at this time. Maybe that should have gone on an earlier album, being probably one of the best of the Wicked Lester songs. Ken, your take on "Dress to Kill"?
Yeah, well, like we talked about some covers that we would change, and that was one of them. And I agree with the Superman theme, that photo session, going into the phone booth and coming out in their costumes, and that would have been great if they did something like that. As for the music on there, I agree. There's missing solos there, and some of those solos are very short that are there. So I would have definitely had Ace, crank out some solos. I'm guessing that Neil Bogart, comes from that, quick pop 2-minute song, and that's why they're that short. And a lot of those songs did not have.
A lot that's on there, yeah.
A lot of those songs didn't have guitar solos. They were just, quick hit you with a quick hook and draw you in, and before you know it, the song's over. They didn't mess around with the solos, so that's I guess my belief why there's missing solos or short solos. As for the songs themselves, I wouldn't add anything. Just extend the songs out a little bit, and that would be it. Just the cover and the songs, the solos. Producer, I could have said Kramer again. I didn't. So far I've done 2, but I'm going to go with "This Is Okay," because I think the sound's all right. It works for me.
It's still a bit thin, but
it's a little thin.
I don't think Neil Bogart was ever going to be a Phil Spector kind of. He was like, record it, 2 takes. That's costing me twice as much. Record it, press it, sell it. Give me the money. So, Mark.
Yes.
Let's get into that side with you.
Well, there's a few points that I thought of when I heard this record. Don't get me wrong, I like Dress to Kill. It's one of those records that I find is a total summertime record, but just like you guys, the problem with this record is I'm getting into it, and before I know it, bam, it's done. It's too short, and it's got to be longer, number one. Number two, Neil Bogart was the wrong guy to produce this record. I understand why it happened. They were low on money. He wanted to come in. He wanted to, keep an eye on them because rumors were running rampant that they were leaving, blah, 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 blah. But, in the perfect alternate world where they didn't have to worry about any of those things and they could have brought in somebody else, even if they would have kept Neil Bogart in there, I would have said to maybe let Dave Whitman have a little bit more input on this record. As an engineer, he's done some excellent stuff with these guys. So I kind of think that he would have been probably a good idea to have a little bit more input on it. Also, another thing that I think that's important to bring up is they should have gave the band more time to write. Like, even giving them like an extra 3-4 days in a rehearsal studio, let them go in there and work on some more songs. I know that they were desperate to push these guys back out on the road to continue to keep the momentum going, but I think it would have totally benefited the record that they would have had a couple of more days to sit down and write some songs still. Because, sure, they might have had a couple songs here and there, but they could have, if they had more time, they could have maybe fleshed them out better, maybe added some more decent licks into songs that they had and maybe lengthened them a little bit, maybe added in some more icing onto them to make them sound better, And the other thing that I wanted to bring up as well was beside the fact of maybe bringing in another producer like a Jack Richardson, who I think would have been a good person at this point to bring in. He's a very rock and roll kind of guy. He's done the Guess Who, Alice Cooper, Peter Gabriel, stuff like that. So I mean, he's a good kind of guy to bring in. He knows his way around a mixing board and stuff. But the gear, okay, when I read in that book that they were using little 15-watt amplifiers for Gene on bass and a little Fender Champ amp for guitars, I was scratching my head going, what the hell are these guys doing?
Battery operated.
Yeah, like you're supposed to be using gear. If you want a big sound, you use a decently sized amp. Sure, it doesn't have to be a big, you don't have to bring in 5 Marshall stacks in there, but bring a half stack at least, or bring a really good combo amp, like a 212 Marshall Blues Breaker amp or something like that would really fill out the sound more. And for the bass, I mean, you gotta put something in there that throws a little bit more thunder than a 15-watt amp in there. Okay, I mean that's why this record sounds thin. The drums sound good. I love the sound of the drums on this record. I think they did a good job. Dave Whitman, I tip my hat to you. And but you know what, Ace Frehley, the man is about Gibson guitars and Marshall amps. Where were they? They weren't anywhere to be found, these Marshall amps on this album. So, two strikes to Mr. Frehley for that, because he should have came and said, "Hey, Carly, where's my Marshall?" and bring it in there and set it up. And they should have did it, and they should have recorded it that way and bring in the proper gear that they use live. I mean, they're saying we don't get the same sound in the studio that we do live. Well, of course not, because you're not using Fender Champs and 15-watt Ampeg amps live. You're using different gear. You want that sound, bring in the gear that you're using. End of rant.
Nice.
May I say one comment?
Yes, you may.
On the producer thing. No Neil Bogart, no Rock and Roll All Night. I mean, he's the one that asked them while they were recording, I believe, to write an anthem.
Oh, they wrote it.
Maybe they could have wrote something else.
Yeah. They wrote it before that?
Yeah, they wrote it.
I thought the story was...
They wrote it and demoed it on the West Coast.
Okay.
So well before they got, they did This Is the
So he asked them that far back?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That was back in January. So,
okay.
That far back. I mean, obviously, everything's so compressed that
it was short
2 weeks later, they're back on the East Coast and they're recording. But they had already demoed it, and that version,
I thought it was a time of recording, but okay.
Okay, Alive.
Do we really have to do this one?
Go for it, Ken.
I wouldn't change a thing.
Right.
That's me. That's my comment.
Lonnie?
I wouldn't change a thing. It's perfect.
Mark?
Okay, the only things I put were... Hang on. I was going to say, this is literally what I put down. I put next to perfect as you could get as far as a product. Okay.
Yep.
I also said I would have tried to maybe record more multiple night shows besides the Cobo Hall, right?
Okay.
Maybe a couple, because think of it from the technical standpoint. If you record in one place, you don't have to keep tearing shit down, putting it back up again, and you get to keep the sound consistent, and maybe it would have been more consistent in tone, and you maybe wouldn't have to do as much fiddle faddling with it later. Who knows? Maybe they would have got a take where they didn't have to replace so much of Paul singing. Who knows? That's all for a crystal ball to tell us, but we don't know, right? But I said, and this is the thing I put too. I go, as far as everything else in here, the only other person I could think of that I could see mixing this record is Martin Birch. He did Live in Japan, like Made in Japan for Deep Purple, right? I mean, years later he did Live After That. This man, when he touches live albums, it's fantastic. And he's been around at this point, so he's more than willing to be around to work on something like this. Believe me, I love this record. I think Eddie Kramer did a great job on this. And the only other thing I would have did as far as the packaging is maybe just put in like a kind of, souvenir trinkety backstage pass laminate for the fans, like in the thing along with the booklet. And that's the only other thing I would have said.
Maybe one other thing is on the back cover, you put like a Where's Waldo kind of find, and you put the little Kiss heads in the audience, and you have to find them. There you go.
Nice. Okay, I would change one thing, and that's include "Let Me Know." And that's
it. That's good.
That is
okay.
it. I mean, I don't even know if I'd. Hold on, is it on room service? Room service? No, yeah, room service and "Let Me Know." But it's already a pretty long album. I mean, it's fucking perfect. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
That would just be the minor thing. It allows us or use "Let Me Know" as the B-side for the single, so that you at least had a B-side.
There you go.
Don't change anything on the album. Just use that as a B-side. Then we get into even more dangerous territory, I guess, with Destroyer.
Yeah.
Oh, Destroyer. The fans versus, I guess, Bob Ezrin. Do we change anything on this album? I'm going to go straight back to you, Mark.
Okay.
Shaking his head, yeah, he's got a whole list of things wrong with Destroyer.
Well, I'm not gonna say there's a million things wrong with it, but there's a few things that I would have changed with it. Number one, I would have, believe it or not, I would have kept Ezrin as the producer. I think that he did a good job with making the songs that they had in their demo form much better in finished form. Definitely. I mean, you listen to Detroit Rock City in its earliest form and then listen to the finished, it's night and day. So as a arranger, songwriter, you keep Bob Ezrin. But where everybody seems to have the problem with this record is it doesn't sound like Kiss, man. What's with the piano and this and that? And the guitars don't sound ballsy. And why is there so much reverb and blah, blah, blah? So if I had that, same thought, again, I would pick somebody else to mix it. Because I know Ezrin is very futsy-wutsy with his kind of, things. I like to keep all my effects on my tracks and stuff like that. But if you had somebody else working in tandem with them who would have mixed the record, I think they could have worked that out, where they would have just left it and let somebody else mix it. And there's lots of people at this time that could have did it. I mean, the people that we already mentioned could have mixed it. Even here's a wild card one to put in. How about someone like Alan Parsons, maybe, to work on it, I mean, he just finished doing Dark Side of the Moon, one of the most classic records of all time. Get him in there and mix something like this. Imagine what Destroyer would have sounded like then if you had somebody like him working on a record like this. Wow, I think it would have been, maybe not as rock and rolly as well. Maybe it would have been a little bit more trippy as well, but maybe it would have been something that would have been cool. I mean, maybe he would have made it more rock. Who knows? Because I mean, he's not only a, acid dropping sci-fi kind of music mixer kind of guy. He does other stuff too, right? But I mean, there's also people like Andy Johns, somebody like him who worked with Zeppelin or somebody who could have took the record, took all the great things that Ezrin did with it, songwriting wise, and gave it the balls that it wanted to appease the fans that were going to, be kind of shaking their heads and scratching their heads listening to it sonically. Because I don't think many people said that the songs are terrible. I think lots of people just say that it sounds so different. That's what you always hear. It sounds so different. It sounds so different. So bring the sound back a bit to it. And the only other thing that I thought that might have been a good thing to do is, since they were adding in stuff already on a live with the booklet and stuff like that, I thought what might have been cool was for Ken Kelly to maybe draw up an alternate kind of little poster that they could have included in with the album, like another image that tied in with the Destroyer kind of imagery, like something else that kind of connects the album cover to another image, you know what I mean? And just something that fans can take out of the album and go, hey, that's really cool, and put up on their wall. Because I mean, they, like you said, they were starting to come at this point with adding little trinkets and gifts for fans for buying the record, so why not do it there?
Interesting. Definitely. Lonnie?
Destroyer is tough for me because I've sung Destroyer's praises on this show many times. It's hard for me to go in there and change anything, to be perfectly honest. I was thinking about this when I was driving to work today, going through albums in my mind. Okay, I do this. Okay, I do that to this album. And I was like, God, I don't... I guess... And it goes back to a lot of... we talk about, what certain albums mean to us and why. Like Revenge means to me, or what Asylum means to Julian, and things like that. Because that album is so imprinted in my mind, and it was my first exposure to the band. I didn't like Destroyer Resurrected even because it changed it, and it changed it. I mean, it's not.
It's so burned in your mind.
It's not. That's not what Destroyer sounds like. And going back to Julian's point from earlier, maybe that's how I'd feel if Hotter Than Hell was my first exposure to Kiss, and Hotter Than Hell got the treatment that we always say it should get. Then no, that's not how Hotter Than Hell should sound. So
I think that would be the case exactly.
So to Julian's point, maybe he has something there, because I that makes sense to me, because I didn't care for Destroyer Resurrected in that same vein. So I'm gonna cop out on this one like I did on the last one, because Destroyer means so much to me, and it's so perfect in my mind that I wouldn't change anything.
Yeah, and that's the problem with anything. I mean, when Tim interviewed Bob for Destroyer Resurrected years ago, and he did ask him about Resurrected and how does Bob Ezrin remix Bob Ezrin, and I can't listen to Resurrected. It's not miles away from where the original Destroyer was, but there's enough going on there that you're like, whoa, wait, that's not on the original.
Like the drums of King of the Nighttime World, when it comes in, like no, that's not how those drums are supposed to sound.
There are just too many times that your brain's
and
kind of
it's causing too, and I don't like that.
Yeah, it's causing misfires. It's like, whoa, that's not supposed to be, So I think totally, when we talk about just taking a step back to Hotter Than Hell, it would be the same situation if that ever were remastered and remixed and made sonically clear. I mean, the Kiss fan brain would be going, "Oh, whoa!"
It's not supposed to be that clear.
I mean, I wonder how many people do listen to Resurrected now as their definitive version of Destroyer. I have not listened to it
since it came out.
Pretty much, yeah.
I've listened to it a few times.
Number one, I don't like the artwork, so it just never gets taken down. And number two, I am just not comfortable with the material on it. I think when we get back to the original Destroyer, if there was a fly on the wall in 1976, I would have said it needs another song. That's the only thing I would change, is that it is too damn short, and even with the Rock and Roll Demons,
but it's just so iconic, though.
Coda and the Newscaster intro. Musically, it's so short. I wouldn't change a thing with calliopes, pianos, the sound of the album. It just needs one more song.
You know what, though? One thing that was interesting about this is I remember a couple of years back when they did, I think it was the podcast did a roundtable, and John Humphreys was in the roundtable, and they talked about the Resurrected album. And John Humphreys was singing his praises, saying that he really liked it and stuff like that, and how it was really much more powerful sounding, and how a lot of the things that were done to it were brought it up to date and stuff like that. But I think that there is what people kind of frowned on, though, was because, like Lonnie, who this album is so embedded in his psyche and is such a part of his, Kiss fandom, that sound, that 1976 sound that they did, was what you expect to hear in it. And when you try to bring a record like that and make it sound more 2000-ish, it just sounds wrong to people's ears.
In the same way that people don't like those re-records that they put out in 2008, 2009. Julian just vomited a little bit in his mouth when I brought it up. I listen to those re-records about as much as I listen to Destroyer Resurrected in the same vein, because that's not how those songs sound. And I know we can do a whole other show about those re-records, but you guys don't listen to those.
Honestly, when it first came out, I listened to it a lot. I listened to it almost every day for like 2 months.
Honestly, I really don't like it.
But I don't like, I don't like it because there's one thing that's really missing from that, and that's the fire and the emotion of the originals. Because there's something about when you first write a song and you lay it down, the excitement of writing a new song. This is no longer new music to them. This is just like, we got to do it because we want to get the copyright back. So let's just get in there and write it and go in and record it again, and that's it. So the same energy and spirit is not in those recordings as they were in the originals.
There's no spirit in those recordings whatsoever, and they completely lack any fire. They lack any really energy. Totally. They are just paint by numbers. I'm sorry, tribute bands put more passion into their performances covering Kiss material than those present on there.
That's another show, but that's almost...
Yeah, and the production qualities of that is just utter utter garbage. And, that's kind of, we're going to get off topic here rapidly if I continue my rant.
Sorry,
So, who's next on Destroyer?
Ken.
Me.
Ken, go for it.
So, I'll make it quick. The first thing is, as for the cover, I would have had them have kept that destruction behind them in that photo. I mean, come on. They were worried about, they're supposed to be dangerous. And
I know.
This is the point where they're starting to turn a corner and become safe. And I would have rather kept more of the destruction and the painting behind them on the cover. As for the music, I would have rather have had the original lyrics to Great Expectations.
No, that's good.
I would have rather had that.
Yeah.
And pretty much nothing else except I always liked the version of God of Thunder on Alive 2, which is at a faster pace, right? I kind of would have loved to hear that at that speed. So that's it. Otherwise, great album. I don't have too much bad to say about it. I mean, it's a classic. What are you going to do?
So now that we've talked about Bob Ezrin, let's get to Perfection, Rock and Roll Over.
Mm-hmm.
I've
That's
listened
tough too.
I've listened to that album 3 times this week, just in the course of my usual listening while I work. And as much as, today I'm going to say I'm not a big fan of See You in Your Dreams, I would replace that with a different song, and that's it. Again, we get into, I don't want to use the word iconic, but that cover is, to me, it's iconic. I wouldn't change anything with the cover. I wouldn't change anything with the packaging. It's just perfect. The inner dust sleeve is beautiful. The sticker was a nice inclusion. The music on the album, the production qualities for me, that, we've said it before and we'll say it probably 100 more times during the course of the podcast. For me, the production of this album is what Kiss sounds like. It captures them completely. It's the most honest recording for Kiss in the studio to date. So, other than today, I don't particularly care for one song. I would replace it maybe with Ace's debut on Queen for a Day. I just can't think of that much more that they had around that time that would have been really good, that would have fit in as well with the rest of this material. We know there was a lot of demos like Rotten to the Core. I'm not going to go through the list. Look them up. They're in one of my books.
Smoke.
Look them up.
Smoke? No, I don't know if Smoke would work, but Mistake would have been a nice counterbalance to Hard Luck Woman with the acoustic guitars. And just being stylistically different. But again, knowing their mindset at this time of we're getting back to what we know we're good at, we're not doing anything that complex, we're not letting our producer, add in anything. It's just don't change a thing on Rock and Roll Over, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I can't even get creative and come up with any ways to make it better. It's got solos in the songs, it's got the right production. Lonnie, let's go to you on there.
Man, we're right in the thick of the band being as big as they could possibly be, and it's really hard to criticize the band that you love at its peak in releasing, their best 3 albums in a row, arguably with Alive, Destroyer, and Rock and Roll Over, back to back to back. But I'm kind of with Julian on the See You in Your Dreams it's the only clunker really on the album, and why Gene thought he needed to re-record it again, make it even worse than it was the first time around, I don't know. But Gene's going to ban me on Twitter.
Yeah. Walking on thin ice there. Thin ice, Lonnie.
Right. But so take out here. I just looked it up here. See You in Your Dreams is 2 minutes and 31 seconds. you can take that out and the album's still just as iconic. So I'm gonna copy off Julian and say that's the only thing I do is I take off "See You in Your Dreams," and maybe you don't even need to add anything in its place because the album's so great that it doesn't need it. Mark's disagreeing with me. Mark has a whole list of problems he has. He has a list of grievances with rock and roll over.
Then let's go to Mark.
Let's hear it.
Well, you're in for a little bit of a shock. I have absolutely no problem with this record. It is one of my favorite records of all time. I absolutely love this record, and there's only one thing I'm going to say about this, and that is, you guys are nuts to want to take off "See You in Your Dreams." Instead, I would have took off "Baby Driver." That's the one that should have came off.
Oh, I like that.
That song is garbage. Okay, it's just one riff over and over and over again in that song. It is terrible. It is. Come on, they already have a good Peter. They have a good Peter song on there already. Just let him have one. And I agree with Julian. They should have pushed and put Ace on with "Queen for a Day." This should have been the record that he made his debut. That would have made it the perennial 6 out of 5 star album if he would have went on there with that song. And, and it would have completed something earlier on that I think that Kiss should have been identified with earlier on, is that everybody in this band sings. They should have solidified that at that point with Ace singing on it. I mean, come on. You could, if you really love "Baby Driver" that much, just put it on "Love Gun" then. I mean, come on. I mean, just... But not on this record. I mean, it's just one riff cycled over and over again. I don't know why. I don't know how you thought that song is better than "See You in Your." I'm just not saying that "See You in Your Dreams" is fantastic. It's not, but it's definitely better in my humble opinion.
"Baby Driver" is quirky. "See You in Your Dreams" is crap. That's just kind of the way I look at it.
"Baby Driver's" quirky. It's a Kiss song.
I actually enjoy "Baby Driver."
It fits. It's a Kiss song,
Yeah.
I mean, everything else in that record is gold. I just think it's fantastic. And that proves to me also that they don't need necessarily somebody like Bob Ezrin to write a good song. If they really sit down, put their minds to it. I mean, look at the songs they wrote for this record. I mean, come on.
Yeah, they just need Sean Delaney.
Yeah.
There you go.
God bless him,
There you go.
Ken.
Okay. Yeah, this album is my favorite Kiss album, so there's nothing wrong. I'm okay with "See You in Your Dreams." And yes, it's not Gene's best, but it's not bad.
It's not Gene's worst either.
And I enjoy "Baby Driver." I enjoy that. I enjoy the way Peter Criss sings that song. He just goes all out on that one. But the whole album, the sequencing of the songs are perfect on it. Production, again, like Julian said, this is the way Kiss sound. This is the sound of Kiss in my mind. Is like, that's the perfect sound. I was on last night on that live on podcast Rock City Live. They were on there and they were playing "Rock and Roll Over" during their chat breaks. And I was just listening. I was like, man, this just sounds so good. So yeah, I love it. I wouldn't change one thing, including artwork and contents and so on. It's perfect. 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I mean, it also brought up just one last thing. I mean, this also brought up another important thing about this record too, is that they went off somewhere into a nice little theater, a little bit out of the way, but not totally out of the way. I mean, Ace had a nice little small drive to go to it, so minds were in a good place when they did it. They had a bit of fun. I remember reading that they were saying that, Peter was in the bathroom with the drum set and he was making little annoying pictures in the video camera and stuff like that. So, I mean, the whole vibe of it seemed to be pretty good, like not as stressful as maybe something like a Destroyer, and that when you have that kind of a vibe, it shows up on your songs and in your recording. That's it.
Yep.
I thought you were going to say Peter's in the bathroom doing lines of cocaine.
That was the previous album.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Well known. Destroyer. Coke. Okay. Let's move on to Love Gun. And Love Gun I've been working on all week. touring history, which doing my head in, I've not been able to listen to the album while doing this. Love Gun, again, for me, has the same problems for it sonically that Dress to Kill does. It's like the Crazy Nights of the originals era, where it's sonically neutered. It's overproduced. It's taken any edge out of it. And as good as the material is, I'm sure I've said it before, if I could listen to stuff like I Stole Your Love, Love Gun, sounding the same production-wise as Rock and Roll Over did, then it would be just unbelievable as an album. But because it was, recorded in a different way, it's just too polished for me. The songs, it really bothers me that Then She Kissed Me is on there. That
we all shake our heads at the same time.
That is just one thing that, jumps out at me that I would change. Again, the artwork is fantastic. The packaging, everything from the superficial level. The sonics, it needs a tougher edge, but it had started to, maybe the band's starting to go in that direction where they're safer, a little bit more friendly sounding, But Then She Kissed Me is shit. Get it off there. Replace it with something else. Put one of Gene's songs on there. Anything. Just give him one of his. Give Peter another song. Shit. Love Bite. Whatever. Just anything but that song. That cover. That piece of garbage. That pointless, meaningless. Okay. Lonnie.
How do you really feel about it? It's really strange to me how they finally got it right on Rock and Roll Over, how they're supposed to sound in the studio.
And then fuck it all up.
They fucked it up. They didn't stick with the program.
And I'll tell you why after you continue.
Okay. But they didn't stick with it. I mean, they finally got it right, and they and I guess they go, we can, because they're kissing that. Well, we can do even better than that. And they if it's not broke, don't fix it. And you finally fixed it, and then you go and you overdo it, in pure Kiss fashion, I guess. But I think we're all going to say Then She Kissed Me should not be on the album. And and we were talking about this with Dress to Kill, but song-wise, like you were saying, Love Gun, I Stole Your Love, Shock Me, Plaster Caster, song-wise, it's right there with the rest of them. Mm-hmm. Song for song, it's great, but the production is it's too friendly, I guess is a good way to put it. Like Julian said, it's too fan-friendly, or they were becoming a safer band at the time too, and they weren't as edgy, and the egos were really out of control by this point too. So, they were losing it.
It's safe. It's
lazy. It's the beginning of the end. Although it's the last of the classic albums, and it really is the beginning of the end. And you can hear it listening to that album that it is the beginning of the end. That you look from where they came from the original album in '74 to where they are here. Had their sound had really changed, and they're not as edgy, obviously. I mean, they become complacent almost by the time Love Gun comes out. And they almost we're so big that we can't do anything wrong. And maybe we can get into that on later episodes with what we speak about, with what we do differently. But you can tell that it's the beginning of the end. But production wise, and then She Kissed Me. I guess if really we can't do anything wrong, so we put on this piece of crap cover the end the album out. So Then She Kissed Me in the production line step with Julian.
I'm gonna make Mark wait for his.
You got a list of grievances.
Let's go to Ken.
Okay.
Build up the rage.
I agree. This album needs to sound more like Rock and Roll Over. That's what I wrote down. Of course, Mark has ideas how that happened, and one of it's not recording in the same place. Of course, that's one of the reasons. But I can't explain what happened there. The other thing, Then She Kissed Me. get that off of there, put on Rocket Ride or something. Something else instead of, I don't know if Ace had written Rocket Ride yet or not. He might have not. But put something else on there. That song just is so not Kiss. It just doesn't make any sense why they put that on there. The other one too is I never cared for Hooligan. I really never really cared for Hooligan. I would have replaced that with another Peter Criss song, a different one of his other ones that he had out there. And otherwise, I still enjoy the album. It's not as good as Rock and Roll Over, in my opinion, but it has a lot of classics. I Stole Your Love, Christian 16, Got Love for Sale, Love Gun, etc. Almost Human's a great Gene song. So it's pretty close. I mean, it still ranks a high, but it's just missing a couple of things that would have made it, even greater.
Yep. Mark, have at it.
Well, one of the things that I think that is sorely missing on this record, and Ken brought it up too, was number one, they didn't record in the same place. Mainly the fact that they didn't record in a large venue, sort of large space, where they could have incorporated everybody together. I think that what's really missing in Love Gun is that at this point, the identity of each member is starting to come through a little too much. Like Paul went in and he demoed his songs like Love Gun, like by himself at Electric Lady, came back and said, this is what I want. Bam, that's it. There's been a rumor running around all the time saying that as far as Eddie Kramer went producing this, he pretty much produced like Ace's material and Peter's, and Gene and Paul kind of said, let us kind of guide the ship and you just engineer kind of thing here for ours. So his involvement as a producer on this record is clearly not as strong as it was on Rock and Roll Over. And I mean, what he should have did and would have made this record sound a hell of a lot better is grab them, all four of them, by the ear or by the hair, however they had to grab each one of them, toss them into the big room, set up all their gear in a circle so they're all facing each other, and play those goddamn songs live in the studio together and track them like that. None of this, I'm going to just track this with Peter and I'm going to do my own bass for this track. And, this is where already it's starting to fall apart, because Kiss is the four of them, okay? Not, me just doing a song with Peter and I'm going to do everything else and that's it. Like, that's already where it's starting to fall apart in my eyes. And I mean, as soon as you start taking the producer and taking him out of his role in this is where it starts to fall apart. Because like I said, sonically, Rock and Roll Over sounded great. He was in there. They wanted Eddie Kramer back. They were begging him to come back pretty much to do that record. And they were probably saying, yes, sir, thank you, sir, every time he made a suggestion. And it showed the record turned out great. Now they had what they wanted. Now they're, they think they're big superstars and this and that. And Paul's like, oh, here's my song. Here's what I'm going to do. You guys are going to play this. And that's it. Woo! And that's it. So, and then they just, he wants it copied exactly like that. And there's no input from anybody. And now it's no longer Kiss stylized. I just think they should have just put them in, threw them into the big room, play those songs together, track it together. It would have made it a more band vibe. It would have sounded more like Rock and Roll Over. It would have sounded way more raw. I agree that this is more produced. And Eddie Kramer stuff traditionally doesn't sound overproduced. I mean, everything from Hendrix to Zeppelin and all that stuff, it was never totally polished and shined, He had a bit of raw edge on his stuff all the time, And with that also comes back to my point where I was talking about earlier about how conformity might have set in. They got too comfortable with Eddie. They didn't, respect him as much. Maybe they should have brought in somebody else to do it. Somebody who would have said, you know what, guys, you're going to listen to me. I'm getting paid to do it. Shut up. Do what I tell you. And that's the end of it, kind of thing. And
Vinnie
who I think would have been good to do this? Maybe somebody like Ken Scott or somebody. He just did, David Bowie's Ziggy Stardust. That's such a killer, cool rock album. He would have gave such a cool rock edge to songs that he would have kept it raw, but put a little bit of touch of production into it where it needed it. And I think that he would have made Love Gun into a really cool album if he would have came in and did that. As far as the song goes, in this. I agree. And Then She Kissed Me is the biggest abomination on a Kiss record I've ever heard. It is. It really.
I think we'll have to do an episode on that topic.
Yeah, it just makes me want to vomit. I'm just going to conclude by saying that and I said this once before, anytime a song that my parents listened to and thought was cool appears on a record that I'm listening to, you know it's a bad idea to put it on a record. I mean, my parents have And Then She Kissed Me, the original, and I've always hated it then, and I hated it when Kiss did it. So yank that crap off.
Yep, agreed. And here's a big difference between this and Rock and Roll Over, is Rock and Roll Over is produced by Eddie Kramer. Love Gun is produced by Kiss and Eddie Kramer. So it's almost that he's back in his pure engineering role.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's easy to agree with the location point that Mark made. Because when we get to Alive 2, the studio side, and maybe a couple of the songs on the live album, you know, they're back in a theater again, playing that stuff. And what a difference.
Must sound great.
Yeah, it makes. I mean, listen to Rocket Ride, listen to Larger Than Life, listen to Rockin' in the USA. That stuff sounds, you know, better.
Yeah.
Again, you know, I still think Kiss is sticking their oar in on the other side of the console a bit too much, probably by that point, and not really just letting Eddie do his thing. But we could, again, get into the debate about Eddie Kramer as producer versus Eddie Kramer as engineer. And I think most people are going to say that he's more of an engineer than a producer. Bob Ezrin is a producer who uses engineers. So,
right.
You know, that's just the technical side of recording. So, you know, Love Gun is not a great sounding album. They get back to the right sort of way that Kiss obviously should be recording on Alive 2. And, you know, let's just finish up there, since it's, you know, the last of really the classic stuff. Alive 2. I know it's not on the menu, but some quick thoughts on that. Anything you'd change, Mark?
No, I don't know. I mean, the only thing about Alive 2 that kind of struck me compared to Alive 1 is I thought that the balance of the audience on Alive 2 was a little too much compared to Alive 1. Right. I found that there's way too much of it. It almost sounds shrilly at times when I listen to that album compared to Alive 1. Like when I put that on headphones and I listen to it, it sounds like a really cool concert experience. The Alive 2 almost, I don't know if they meant to do this on purpose, but it almost sounds like a Beatles show, like the high, shrilly, too high, shrilly audience. It sounds like girls screaming like crazy in your ears. It sounds really odd. I mean, I think it takes away from the performances of the songs, you know, like what they were trying to get off the recording of the songs for the live experience. I just don't think it's as clear a performance. And as far as side 4 goes, I love side 4. I'm not a big fan of Any Way You Want It, to be quite honest, but I mean, I'd rather have that than And Then She Kissed Me. I'll stand behind that 110%.
Yeah, I'd rather not have either of them and have an additional Kiss song.
Yeah, of course.
You know, for better or worse, you know, even a Peter song. Lonnie.
Well,
the only thing, there's a few things about Alive 2, like I would have changed up the track listing a little bit and put Do You Love Me on there and Take Me on there as opposed to Tomorrow and Tonight, and maybe Hard Luck Woman too. You know what I mean? I think that those are just better songs and better Kiss songs and better of a time capsule where the band was at the time. I would definitely put those two songs on there instead. And obviously I would take out Any Way You Want It also. I'm done with Alive 2 after Larger Than Life.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much for me, you know, the error, we'll call it the error, some people call it the misprint version of that album that includes Take Me, Hooligan, and Do You Love Me. You know, those 3 songs added to the ones already on there would make the album perfect. You know, if it more closely married up with the material that they were performing during the Love Gun tour. I think I could even do without the studio side and just have the pure live album format akin to what they'd done with the original Alive, and save those 4 songs, because I'm not even going to include Any Way You Want It. That's just as bad as Then She Kissed Me. And maybe have released that as an EP, mid-tour, or who knows. But just to go with the pure live album format would have been a little bit better, and even if it meant having Hooligan on there. I think it's a fun part of the tour when they're performing that, because it's, again, a Peter song. So, Tomorrow and Tonight, I should not be on there on Alive 2. It wasn't performed. It's not a very good song anyway for me. It's one of those Kiss songs that I'm kind of like, blah. It's 50-50. Some days I like it, some days I hate it, and very seldom do I play it. Ken?
Yeah, well, this being my first album I bought, I can't say too much bad about it. It was just the images on the front, especially of Gene with the blood, was quite an interesting thing for me to pick up at the drugstore, I remember. And then opening that gatefold, that's just iconic. I mean, just a great shot that they took there of the band with all the fire and everything. So packaging, great. Booklet, great. Sleeves, even, shows the crowd kind of on the sleeves and that sort of thing. And then the music, it's all good. But like you said, that Tomorrow Tonight probably could have been replaced, and they could have added maybe a couple more. But I'm good with the studio side. Yes, the Dave Clark 5 song, I could take or leave. It's okay. It's just kind of like, they're going back to their somewhat British influences that they had back in the day. But the other songs are just great new Kiss songs, and they sound good. So I'm good with the album. I think it's a great album, and I can't really pick anything else bad about it. I guess the only other thing is, like, I agree with Mark about the crowd noise was a little on the higher end. It probably should have been a little lower. That's it.
All right.
I have to agree, though, one more thing about what Ken said. I think that, honestly, though, this album has by far the best, the booklet and all those extras that came in with it. I think it's just fantastic. I think that's the best record as far as that goes.
Hey, I can actually see everyone finally.
Yeah.
Everybody?
So, just in time to wrap things up, any final thoughts? I think there's a few changes that we made. Everyone's experience is going to be different on any one of these albums. So, this would be a really cool one to have people chime in on, whether it's on the YouTube page, the Facebook, or on the FAQ message board page when we post this episode later today. What would you change on any one of these albums? Or, would you simply leave them as is? Go into Fantasyland. What do you think could make them better in any way? So, we're at the end. We've got our video back. I'm going to end this while we've got video of all of us. So, Ken, Mark, Lonnie, thank you for joining me today. And everyone out there, thank you for listening to us. And we will see you next time. Thank you for spending time listening to the KissFAQ podcast today. All sales are final. There are no refunds. If you'd like, look us up on Facebook or come over to the KissFAQ message board and discuss the topic we broadcast today. Don't forget to rate us on iTunes, Spreaker, or wherever you've listened to the show. We hope you'll join us again.